A man walks into a watch boutique. He is wearing a Jacob & Co. Astronomia on his wrist. The room goes quiet, because nobody knows how to react. Across the room, a collector in his 40s. The kind of man who owns 3 Patek Philippes and knows the reference numbers by heart, glances at the watch and looks away. Not interested. Somewhere between dismissive and something harder to name. Then someone checks the price. 7 figures. And that's the moment the story gets interesting. Because the brand this man just dismissed, the brand the watch world has been laughing at for 20 years, is being bought by people he will never compete with. Something doesn't add up. And the harder you look, the more the math stops making sense until you realize you were looking at the wrong picture entirely. The contradiction that started everything. Let's talk about what Jacob & Co. actually is in 2026. Not what it was, not what the internet says it is. What it actually is right now. The brand has a manufacturing facility in Geneva, Switzerland, the same city, the same postal code as Patek Philippe and Vacheron Constantin. They employ trained movement engineers. Their top pieces contain complications that took years to develop from scratch. The Astronomia tourbillon has a movement with 4 rotating arms, a triple-axis tourbillon, and a hand-painted rotating globe of Earth. It took Luca Soprana, the head of Jacob & Co.'s Geneva watchmaking team, and a group of engineers, 3 years to bring it from concept to a working prototype. The Twin Turbo Furious, another piece from their catalog, contains 2 synchronized tourbillons and a decimal-minute repeater. A decimal-minute repeater is a watch that chimes the time on demand in units of 10 minutes. To build one requires machining components to tolerances measured in hundredths of a millimeter, assembling a chiming mechanism with hundreds of individual parts, and tuning the acoustics of the case to make the sound worth hearing. It is the kind of complication that watchmakers spend careers attempting. Jacob & Co. built one and put it in a watch that looks like a racing engine. And yet, type Jacob & Co. into any major watch forum, read the first 10 comments. The word gaudy appears within 30 seconds. Not real watchmaking within a minute. Celebrity bling within 2. The watch community's verdict on Jacob & Co. has been consistent for 2 decades. Loud, tasteless, not serious. Here is the contradiction that nobody wants to hear. Both of these things are true at the same time. The dismissal is real, but the engineering is also real. The brand that watch collectors use as a punchline is, simultaneously, operating at a technical level that most of the brands they respect could not match. And here is the part that makes it genuinely interesting. The criticism never went away. Year after year, the watch forums returned to the same verdict. Gaudy, not serious. Celebrity bling. The brand has existed long enough that the people writing those comments in 2026 were children when the first ones were written in 2005. The criticism regenerated itself. A new generation inherited the dismissal without the context. They don't even know why they're supposed to think this. They just know they're supposed to. That is not what happens to brands that aren't relevant. That is what happens to brands that found a nerve and stayed on it. How does a brand end up in 2 different conversations at once, and winning in both of them? They were supposed to disappear after the bling era. The early 2000s came and went. Hip-hop's relationship with visible luxury shifted. The brands that built their identity on celebrity association faded or pivoted. Jacob & Co. did neither. Something changed, and not in the direction anyone predicted. The explanation that doesn't hold. Ask anyone in the watch world why Jacob & Co. doesn't get respect, and the answer comes fast, too confident, rehearsed, almost. It's just rappers and athletes. The founder had legal problems. That tainted the whole brand. It's hype. Expensive hype, but still hype. These explanations are not exaggerated. Jacob Arabo, the founder, and the man who built the brand from a single workshop near the Diamond District in Manhattan, did plead guilty in 2008 to making false statements in connection with a federal money laundering investigation, and he served time. That happened. The celebrity association is also real. Jay-Z mentioned Jacob in his lyrics. Floyd Mayweather paid $18 million for the billionaire watch in 2015. Let's hold that moment for 1 second, because the watch world's reaction to it tells you everything about the divide we're examining. When Mayweather bought the billionaire, the watch community's response was somewhere between contempt and bemusement. It wouldn't be the first watch that'll cost that high. There are watches that have cost incredible amounts during auctions, and no one bats an eye even when they are used. But instead of awe, the purchase led to people calling the watch tasteless, and it's not because of the watch itself. It's because of the buyer. Mayweather is the kind of person who buys stuff like that. Of course he did. That's such a Mayweather watch, people said. But here is what the watch community missed. Mayweather's purchase is now the most famous single watch transaction of the century. The watch became mythological. The billionaire is the watch that everyone who follows watches knows about, not because the watch press promoted it, but because it attached itself to the most famous athlete in the world at the peak of his fame. The watch community dismissed the watch. The world made it famous. The 5-time zone watch, the piece that first made Jacob famous, was worn by Naomi Campbell, Bono, and Derek Jeter. That culture is part of what Jacob & Co. is. And yet the explanation doesn't hold. Here is how you know. Hype has a lifespan. It arrives fast, burns hot, and fades faster. The brands that survived on celebrity energy alone in the early 2000s, names that lived in the same world Jacob did, most of them are either gone or operating at a fraction of their peak. Jacob & Co. is not gone. The brand opened a flagship store in Seoul in 2025. They presented at Watches and Wonders, the most important annual gathering in the watch industry in recent years. The pieces they presented made Swiss journalists stop and ask questions. The billionaire timeless treasure was presented in 2023 at a price of $20 million. Yet, it sold. Let's hold that for 1 second. $20 million for a watch. And the buyer, whoever they are, their name unpublished, the transaction private, did not negotiate, did not hesitate while reading reviews, did not check the watch forums. They decided that $20 million was the right number, and they wrote the check. The watch community does not have a framework for this that doesn't involve calling it excessive. But excessive is a word that requires a standard. The standard the watch community uses is craft, history, and restraint. The buyer of the $20 million watch used a different standard. Their standard won. If this were only hype, it would have faded. It didn't. So the question isn't whether the criticism is deserved. The question is whether the criticism is the whole story, and it isn't. There's more. The move nobody took seriously. In 2007, Jacob Arabo founded Jacob & Co. S.A. in Geneva. At the time, the watch world treated this as a publicity move, a jeweler buying a Swiss address to put on his cases, a way to borrow Swiss credibility without earning it. The industry was politely skeptical and privately dismissive. They were wrong. That same year, Jacob & Co. unveiled the Quentin, a watch with the longest mechanical power reserve of any timepiece at that time. 31 days. 1 month on a single wind. Rolex couldn't do it. Patek couldn't do it. The brands that were supposed to represent the ceiling of Swiss watchmaking couldn't match a number that arrived on the dial of a watch from the man the industry called a jeweler who'd wandered into horology. No one fully acknowledged it. Then came the Astronomia. Unveiled at Basel World 2013, the Astronomia Tourbillon is a watch where the movement is the spectacle. 4 rotating arms extend from a central barrel and turn inside the case, one complete revolution every 20 minutes. On one arm, a rotating globe of Earth, hand-painted in blue and green lacquer. On the opposite arm, a diamond cut with 288 facets, spinning, continuously scattering light. On the other 2 arms, a triple-axis tourbillon, and a time display using a differential gear train that stays perfectly level regardless of how the rest of the movement moves around it. Most watch movements are hidden. The dial covers them. You see the hands, the indices, the date window, the face of the watch, which is a translation of what the movement is doing. The Astronomia inverted this. There is no dial to speak of. The movement is what you see. The watch is its own inside out. Swiss watchmakers who examined the Astronomia didn't laugh. Independent horologists who spent their careers studying movements wrote about it seriously. The piece was argued over. It earned something Jacob & Co. had never quite had from the mechanical side of the industry. Genuine technical respect, given reluctantly and never loudly. Here is the observation worth holding. They didn't try to become accepted. They built something too extreme to ignore. Those are different strategies, and only one of them works long-term. The Smithsonian Institution, which houses the most important collection of scientific instruments in the United States, acquired an Astronomia for its permanent collection, not as an example of excess, as an example of significant mechanical achievement. The watch world laughed. The Smithsonian disagreed. These two facts coexist without resolving. There is one more detail here that gets consistently overlooked. Jacob Arabo himself, the man, the founder, the person the legal case tarnished, came out of federal prison in 2010 and went straight back to work. He did not rebrand. He did not issue apologies to the industry. He built the Astronomia. The most technically ambitious watch of his career was designed in the years immediately following the worst period of his life. Whatever else you want to say about Jacob Arabo, that is not the behavior of someone who ran out of things to say. The Smithsonian has a Jacob & Co. But that's not even the most interesting part of this story. The most interesting part is what happened next, and who started paying attention, the deeper pattern. This is where the story stops being about Jacob & Co. and starts being about something larger. And I've decided this part into 4. Part 1. The taste war nobody admitted was happening. Traditional luxury operates on a specific logic. The value of the thing is partly in how few people understand it. A Patek Philippe Nautilus on the wrist signals membership in a group that knows what a Nautilus is. A Vacheron overseas in steel communicates to a specific audience, people who've done the reading, spent the time, developed the taste. Old luxury is the language of recognition between people who already know. Jacob & Co. operates on different logic entirely. The Astronomia doesn't ask if you've done the reading. It doesn't reward insider knowledge. It rewards eyes. Anyone in any room, at any level of watch education, sees it and reacts. That reaction is the product. Old luxury is about being recognized by 3 people in the room who understand. New luxury is about being impossible to ignore by everyone in the room, regardless. Neither philosophy is wrong, but they're genuinely incompatible. A person who built their identity around quiet signals finds a Jacob watch offensive. Not because it's cheap, it isn't. The person doesn't find it offensive because it's badly made. The top-tier pieces demonstrably aren't, but has problems with the watch because it refuses to play the game they've spent years mastering. The contempt in watch forums isn't indifference. Indifference looks like silence. The contempt is loud and specific and returns to the same brand every few years to check if it's gone yet. You don't keep going back to dismiss something that you've actually dismissed. You go back because some part of your brain hasn't finished processing it. The purist's contempt is actually the clearest possible evidence that Jacob & Co. matters. You cannot be irrelevant and infuriating simultaneously. The fact that the brand generates this specific emotional response, not boredom, not indifference, but the sharp, slightly personal irritation that some watch collectors feel when the name comes up, is the proof that the brand found a nerve and kept finding it. The contempt is proof. Part 2. Benjamin Arabov and what actually changed. Jacob Arabo's son, Benjamin Arabov, took over as CEO and brought a completely different understanding of where attention lives in 2026. The old luxury model assumed that print coverage, physical boutiques, and word of mouth among wealthy circles was the complete distribution system for brand desire. Benjamin understood that desire now forms online, specifically in the form of movement videos, a Jacob & Co. Astronomia video on social media with a close-up of the arms rotating, the globe spinning, and the diamond scattering light into the camera gets watched by people who have never considered buying a watch. They watch it because it moves, because it's hypnotic, because watching 100,000 tiny components operating simultaneously is a form of pleasure that requires no context. This matters enormously. Every traditional watch brand has to explain itself to earn attention. You need to know what a tourbillon is before you care that a movement has one. Jacob & Co. created content that doesn't require explanation. The movement speaks directly to the visual cortex, and the watch education happens afterward, if it happens at all. People who don't understand tourbillons now watch them spin for entertainment. Jacob & Co. built the gateway. Here is the quiet detail that reveals how complete this shift has been. The comment sections on Jacob & Co. movement videos contain comments from teenagers asking what the spinning thing is. These are not watch collectors. These are potential watch collectors. People encountering mechanical watchmaking for the first time through a brand that the watch community dismisses. In 10 years, some percentage of those teenagers will own serious watches. The first brand they ever loved was Jacob. The traditional watch brands have not figured out how to do this. Patek Philippe has social media accounts. Their content is excellent. Their movement videos are beautifully shot. They get a fraction of the engagement that Jacob & Co. gets, because Patek's content assumes the viewer already cares. Jacob's content makes the viewer care before they understand why. That sequence, feeling first, understanding later, is how new audiences are built. Patek is speaking to the already converted. Jacob is building the congregation. Benjamin Arabov understood something his father built the product for, but didn't fully realize until the phone became the primary screen. A watch that looks astonishing in motion is worth more in a 15-second video than a watch that looks astonishing in a glass case. The Astronomia was made for the era it arrived in, even though it arrived 15 years before the era caught up. Part 3. The Product Staircase. The watches at the top of the Jacob & Co. catalog cost millions. The Billionaire, the Bugatti Chiron Tourbillon, the Twin Turbo Furious. These pieces are genuinely made for people with asymmetric wealth. People for whom the question is not, can I afford this? But, does this represent what I want to say? But Jacob & Co. also makes the Epic X, the World is Yours, and the Basketball Collection. These start under $10,000. They are accessible entry points into a brand that also makes million-dollar watches. This is an architecture borrowed directly from the greatest luxury conglomerates in the world. Hermès sells scarves before it sells Birkins. Louis Vuitton sells wallets before it sells luggage. The entry point creates brand loyalty and aspiration. The top of the range creates myth. Jacob & Co. built a staircase. Every step goes higher. Every step is louder than the last. And at the top of the staircase is a watch that costs more than most people's houses, surrounded by people who find that completely normal. The intelligence of this architecture is that it creates a coherent world. When a 22-year-old buys an Epic X for under $10,000, they are not buying a budget Jacob. They are buying a ticket into a world where the Astronomia and the Billionaire also exist. They are buying membership in the aesthetic. The entry-level piece doesn't dilute the million-dollar pieces. It creates aspiration toward them. The person who buys the Epic X today and builds their life over the next decade will look at the Astronomia differently at 35 than they did at 22. The brand has been with them the whole time. This is how Hermès does it. Hermès sells silk scarves before it sells the Birkin. The scarf buyer is not buying a cheaper Birkin. They are buying the language of Hermès and learning to speak it. By the time the Birkin becomes attainable, they are already fluent. Part 4. The Identity Expansion. Selling watches was never the whole strategy. Jacob & Co. began expanding into branded lifestyle and real estate. The brand's identity, extreme wealth, visible success, the refusal to be quiet about either, translates across categories. A watch brand that has established itself as the language of a specific kind of aspiration doesn't have to stay in watches to sell that aspiration. They stopped being a watch brand that wealthy people buy. They started being an identity that wealthy people inhabit. The brands the watch community respects most are largely single category. They make watches. They make watches well. They've done little else for 150 years. This is admirable in terms of craft focus. It is also a limitation in terms of what the brand can mean outside the watch conversation. Jacob & Co. operates with no such limitation. The brand means something to people who have never looked at a movement under a loupe, and that meaning converts into revenue across categories. Two buyers, the same brand, completely different transactions. And the collision between them is where this story really lives. The human cost of the argument. Imagine this. A collector in his mid-40s. He has been buying watches for 20 years. He owns a Royal Oak, a Daytona, a Lange one. He spent years reading about movements, traveling to boutiques, and building relationships with dealers. He knows the difference between a column wheel chronograph and a cam-operated one. He can identify a Patek by the case profile from 6 feet away. He sees a Jacob & Co. in a magazine spread and closes the magazine. Not because it's unaffordable, because of what wearing it would say. Because in the world he has built for himself, the language he has learned, the relationships those watches represent, the identity he has constructed around the idea that watches are objects of quiet mastery, a Jacob & Co. is not a different watch. It is a different statement about what a watch is for. He cannot wear it without saying something he doesn't want to say. There is no animosity in this. He has nothing against the watch technically. He looked at the movement once, years ago, and acknowledged, privately, not for publication, that the engineering was real. The problem isn't the watch. The problem is what accepting the watch would mean about the world he built. Look at this other scenario. A 28-year-old. She built a business in the last 4 years, the kind of business that no longer requires apology. She saw the Astronomia movement on a video 2 years ago and saved it. Eventually started researching and bought an Epic X. Then eventually started looking at the Astronomia itself. She doesn't know what a tourbillon is in technical terms. She knows what it looks like. She knows how people react when they see it on her wrist. She knows that the man across the table, the one with the Royal Oak, glanced at it and looked away. She understood exactly what that look meant, but she didn't care. She didn't buy the watch to earn his approval. She bought it knowing she wouldn't get it. She bought the watch that says something true about who she is, in a language everyone understands, without needing the room to know the reference. The man with the Royal Oak spent 20 years learning the language of quiet signals. She found a different language and spoke it fluently on the first attempt. These two people are not having a disagreement about watches. They are having a disagreement about what luxury is, for who it serves, who it speaks to, whose definition wins. They will never resolve it. The argument will continue for as long as both of them exist. And Jacob & Co. is in the middle of it, selling to both ends of the staircase, completely untroubled. There is a reason some collectors still refuse to even try one on. It's not because it's heavy or because the finishing isn't right. Not because the movement isn't interesting. Because trying it on is an act of consideration. And consideration, to a certain kind of watch person, feels like a concession they're not ready to make. What they're really saying is, I have spent years building a position in this world. I know the language. I know the hierarchy. I have earned the right to be taken seriously in the room I've decided I want to be in. A Jacob & Co. on the wrist doesn't threaten that technically. It threatens it symbolically. Because the person most associated with it is the 28-year-old entrepreneur, the one who didn't earn the approval, didn't learn the language, walked straight past the hierarchy and bought the watch that couldn't be ignored. And the collector who has done everything right, learned everything correctly, earned his position, he is not the person the room looks at first. Here is what that feeling actually is. It's not snobbery, exactly. It's something older and more specific. The feeling you get when you realize the rules you mastered aren't the rules being played by anymore. The feeling of watching the game change around you while you're still playing the old version. That feeling has nothing to do with the watch. The watch is just where it surfaces. The refusal to try it on is not about the watch. It never was. That tension doesn't have a clean answer, but the market has been answering it anyway in a direction nobody predicted. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. You walk into a store or browse online, and everything looks the same, but behind the scenes, there's a system. Prices aren't always fair, availability is controlled, and one bad decision can leave you overpaying for something that doesn't even hold its value. That's why I created a complete free insider guide to buying watches. Inside, you'll find the best watches to buy, the watches to avoid, and how to choose a watch that actually fits your style and budget long term. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the free guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, Let's move on to the next part, what this was always about. Here is what Jacob & Co. actually proved. Not that loud beats quiet, not that new money is better than old money, not that the watch community's taste is wrong. What it proved is this: taste is not neutral. When someone calls a watch gaudy, they are not making an observation. They are making a claim about whose preferences should govern the room. That claim is a cultural position dressed up as an aesthetic one. And cultural positions lose their authority when the people they were designed to exclude become too wealthy to need them. Old luxury built itself around scarcity, not just of product, but of knowledge. You had to learn the language to be admitted. That barrier kept the community coherent and kept the prices stable. The barrier worked because the people it excluded couldn't pay their way in anyway. Jacob & Co. showed up with a watch that made no demands of the viewer and a buyer base that didn't need to be admitted anywhere. The purists read this as a failure of taste. The market read it as a new distribution channel for extreme wealth. Both readings are accurate. Only one of them is interesting. And here is the observation that takes the longest to land but hits hardest when it does. Jacob & Co. did not disrupt the watch industry. They ignored it. Disruption implies engagement, seeing the existing game and choosing to play it differently. Jacob & Co. looked at the game, looked at who was playing it, looked at who wasn't being served by it, and started a different game entirely. In the same room, at the same time, using watches. The fact that the original game is still being played, the Nautilus still sells, the long one still matters, the quiet luxury conversation is still happening, doesn't diminish what Jacob & Co. built. Both games exist and matter to different people. The only error is assuming that because one of them preceded the other, it has authority over it. Here's the observation that will stay with you. The man in the watch forum who types Jacob & Co. isn't real watchmaking, and the man who bought the $20 million timeless treasure in 2023 have never been in the same room, never read the same publications, and do not share a single frame of reference about what a watch is for. One of them is right about watchmaking. The other one has the watch. Somewhere, collectors scroll past a Jacob & Co. post and pauses. The Astronomia is spinning. The globe is rotating. The diamond is catching light at angles that don't seem possible. He doesn't like it, and he doesn't understand why other people like it. He watches the whole video anyway. He doesn't comment. He doesn't share it. He scrolls on and tells himself he's moved past it. But later, not immediately, not that night, he thinks about the movement, the four arms, the globe turning, the diamond catching light. He tries to figure out what it reminds him of. A planetarium, maybe. Or those mechanical oraries he saw in a science museum once as a child. Something his brain filed under beautiful and mechanical before he knew what a tourbillon was or why it mattered. The watch he would never wear made him feel something he hasn't been able to fully name since. Not admiration, exactly. Not envy. Something more like recognition. The recognition that something real was built here. That someone cared enough to make something this strange and this committed. He never says this out loud. That, more than any sales figure, is what Jacob & Co. actually built. Something you cannot stop thinking about, even when you've decided you don't like it. This was never a watch story. It was a story about who gets to define what luxury means and what happens when the answer changes. Jacob & Co. didn't earn the watch world's respect. They didn't try to. They built something that the people who already have everything can't stop buying, and something that the people who are watching can't stop watching. Respected? No. Successful? Yes. Understood? Not yet. That gap between the brand the industry dismissed and the brand the market chose is where the most interesting question in luxury lives right now. Who decides what's worth wanting? The people who learned the language, or the people who never needed it? So, will you be buying a Jacob & Co. watch? Tell me in the comments then, like this video and subscribe.